Clutter is the disease of American writing. We are a society strangling in unnecessary words, circular constructions, pompous frills, and meaningless jargon. William Zinsser on writing well. But how can we recognize clutter, and how can we cut this disease out of our writing? Per Zinsser, the secret of good writing is to strip every sentence to its cleanest components. Every word that serves no function, every long word that could be a short word, every adverb that carries the same meaning that's already in the verb, every passive construction that leaves the reader unsure of who is doing what. These are the 1,001 adulterants that weaken the strength of a sentence, and they usually occur in proportion to education and rank. In other words, being smart and well-educated won't save your communication from clutter. For that, you need to aggressively rewrite and ruthlessly cut what weakens your words. Some guidelines for cutting the clutter. And a hat tip, I borrowed some of this from Richard Norquist, a professor of English and rhetoric and the author of 3 books on writing. Number 1, reduce long clauses to shorter phrases where possible. Now keep in mind, a clause is a sensible grouping of words containing both a subject and a verb. An independent or main clause expresses a complete thought and can stand on its own as a sentence. A dependent or subordinate clause begins with a relative pronoun or subordinating conjunction and expresses only part of a thought, so it can't be a sentence on its own. A phrase may contain a subject without a verb without a subject, or a bunch of adjectives or other sentence parts with neither a subject nor verb. But if it has a subject and a verb, it's a clause. Which clauses can you reduce to shorter phrases? Number 2, reduce phrases to single words. Again, both of these are to do it where possible without sacrificing meaning or impact. Number 3, avoid there is, there are, or there were as sentence openers, generally. These types of sentence openers not only add extra words without adding any extra meaning, they also sound pretty passive and boring. Number 4, don't overwork modifiers. This includes adverbs, adjectives, and modifying phrases. Use only what is necessary to build the image or idea you're trying to create in your reader's mind. Number 5, avoid redundancies. Intentional repetition for rhetorical effect can be an immensely effective tool for grabbing your reader's attention. Unintentional repetition, usually a result of lazy revision or a lack of knowledge or awareness on the writer's part, tends to bore or even annoy readers. Number 6, use active verbs. Passive voice is occasionally necessary and desirable, and of course we need to use linking to-be verbs when they're called for. But most of your prose should propel your reader forward via verbs that denote action. And in line with the modifiers guidelines stated before, use adverbs only when they are necessary to change the meaning of the verb. Don't try to amplify verbs with adverbs or other modifiers. Just choose stronger action verbs. Number 7, don't try to show off. Kill your darlings, in other words. Form should follow function. Your style or voice should serve the story or message you're trying to convey. Extra frills that communicate nothing won't make you sound smarter or more literary as a writer. Number 8, cut empty phrases. George Orwell gives some examples of these. Phrases like, a not unjustifiable assumption, leaves much to be desired, would serve no good purpose, a consideration which we should do well to bear in mind, etc. You'd be amazed how many of these and their ilk can crop up in your writing without you even realizing it. Number 9, avoid using noun forms of verbs, also known as nominalization, where you change a verb or adjective into a noun, like making destroy into destruction. Generally avoid those shun words wherever possible. The same goes for isms. When you can, keep your verbs, verbs, and your nouns, nouns. Number 10, replace vague nouns with more specific words. The more specific you can be, the clearer and more compelling the images you'll create in your reader's brain. If you're only talking about people doing things, you'll lose your readers faster than I get a sunburn in the summer. So let's go over some examples to see how this works. Pulling a sample from George Orwell's essay, Politics and the English Language, we can interpret a politician saying this: while freely conceding that the Soviet regime exhibits certain features which the humanitarian might be inclined to deplore, we must, I think, agree that a certain curtailment of the right to political opposition is an unavoidable concomitant of transitional periods, and that the rigors which the Russian people have been called upon to undergo have been amply justified in the sphere of concrete achievement. To really mean, I believe in killing off your opponents when you can get good results by doing so. It's probably obvious why a politician might prefer the former statement. It's an impressive method to deflect responsibility, but I hope it's equally obvious why any writer worth his ink would prefer the latter. Let's test it ourselves. Try this sentence. The bricks on our new house are red in color, and in spite of the fact that they are new, the look of these bricks is a used, beat-up appearance. This one should be pretty obvious. We know that red is a color, so red in color is redundant, as is they are new, when we've already been told it's a new house. The fact that is pretty much always useless. One of those empty phrases mentioned earlier. We don't need to reference the look of the bricks, since it's already obvious we're talking about appearance, and we don't need to repeat bricks because the antecedent is clear from the first part of the sentence. So a simpler, clearer version might read, the red bricks on our new house look used and beat up. Notice we still have all the information we were given before. But now the subject of the sentence and what the sentence is saying about that subject are clear. We've taken a sentence of 3 clauses that repeats itself all over the place and turned it into a single clause sentence that paints a crystal clear image by telling us exactly what we need to know once. Professor Norquist gives us this gem. Omar and I, we returned back to the hometown where we both grew up to attend a reunion of the people that we went to high school with 10 years ago in the past. The Department of Redundancy department called. They want their deja vu back again. A clearer, more direct, and more readable sentence might read, Omar and I returned to our hometown for our 10-year high school reunion. Nothing wrong with that sentence. It's got all the information that we need. And it's certainly shorter and more engaging than the overwritten rough draft. But if it doesn't do anything for you, don't worry. It's not the only way to state the fact. Uncluttered doesn't have to mean uncreative. Were I writing this sentence as part of a story, I might say something like, the smokeless smokestacks greeted us like gravestones as Omar and I pulled into town to celebrate escaping high school 10 years back. I wouldn't say that's a better rewrite, necessarily, but it is a bit more specific in detail and includes an aspect of character that the previous version didn't. As such, it has more imagery and attitude than the previous version, and hence it would probably work better for the specific story that I'd be trying to tell. Establishing some important information about character, setting, and situation in a single sentence without any extra clutter getting in the way. But the way you choose to write the sentence is just that, your choice. What's the most effective sentence for communicating your image and meaning? You decide. How can the rest of us achieve such enviable freedom from clutter? Zinzer asks. The answer is to clear our heads of clutter. Clear thinking becomes clear writing. One can't exist without the other. It's impossible for a muddy thinker to write good English. He may get away with it for a paragraph or two, but soon the reader will be lost, and there's no sin so grave, for the reader will not be easily lured back. Of course, Zinzer himself would say that writing is rewriting, and most of this making writing good process happens in revision. But the more you practice refining your writing in revision like this, the more you'll internalize what good prose looks like, and the better rough drafts you'll write. But of course, this means recognizing and viciously eliminating the bad. You gotta cut the clutter for the gold to shine through. Per Zinzer, If the reader is lost, it's usually because the writer hasn't been careful enough. That carelessness can take any number of forms. Perhaps a sentence is so excessively cluttered that the reader, hacking through the verbiage, simply doesn't know what it means. Perhaps a sentence has been so shoddily constructed that the reader could read it in several ways. Perhaps the writer has switched pronouns in mid-sentence, or has switched tenses, so the reader loses track of who is talking or when the action took place. Perhaps sentence B is not a logical sequel to sentence A. The writer, in whose head the connection is clear, hasn't bothered to provide the missing link. Perhaps the writer has used a word incorrectly by not taking the trouble to look it up. This is the disease of not just American writing, I would say, but of English language writing in general. Orwell and Zinsser and many others would probably agree, though I certainly can't speak for them. But as an English and creative writing teacher, I read a ton of this type of prose every year. And reading and recognizing that helps me to be on guard against similar sins in my own work. But I always find them. The same mistakes my students make appear in my own prose. My rough drafts are riddled with clutter and crap. Now some of this, most of it when I'm extra diligent, disappears in the revision process, but some of it always makes through even to the publication stage. So it's not a disease that has a cure, or if there is a cure, I've never heard of it. And I've read a lot about writing over the years, even before I had a master's degree and 10 years teaching in the subject. But if anyone does know a cure for clutter, please leave it in the comments below, and like the video and subscribe to the channel while you're down there, and consider clicking the join button and becoming a member. You got lots of cool stuff and things for $1.03 a month, and you're going to be helping me to produce more and better videos. It's a win-win. Thank you so much to my current members. You guys are helping to keep the channel alive and me alive, and I couldn't be more grateful. Back to the disease discussion. So there's no well-known cure for clutter, certainly. The only palliative is to hold high standards for our work and to treat the reader's time and attention with the same respect that we want them to give our work. That means we need to put in the time and mental energy to make our diction and syntax sing with meaning. As Zinsser puts it, writers must therefore constantly ask, what am I trying to say? Surprisingly often, they don't know. Then they must look at what they have written and ask, have I said it? Is it clear to someone encountering the subject for the first time? If it's not, some fuzz has worked its way into the machinery. The clear writer is someone clear-headed enough to see this stuff for what it is. Fuzz. Want a fun challenge? Try this little paragraph that Orwell quotes in his Politics in the English Language, originally written by Professor Harold Lasky in an essay in the journal Freedom of Expression. And remember what Zinsser said, clutter typically occurs in proportion to education and rank. I am not, indeed, sure whether it is not true to say that the Milton who once seemed not unlike a 17th century Shelley had not become, out of an experience ever more bitter in each year, more alien to the founder of that Jesuit sect which nothing could induce him to tolerate. Creative writers can sometimes get away with a double or even occasionally a triple negative. A sextuple negative, though, is pushing it. See if you can reconstruct that one into something more informative and less painful to read, and post your results in the comments. I'd love to see them. Now, Zinsser closes the chapter with an injunction that all writers should always keep in mind. Writing is hard work. A clear sentence is no accident. Very few sentences come out right the first time or even the third time. Remember this in moments of despair. If you find that writing is hard, it's because it is hard. Keep plugging away, my writerly friends. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, good luck and good writing. Peace.